What's up, guys? I've got another goofy deck. This time, it's a Soul-Binding Gate deck. Let's give this card a read because this is a really obscure one. Very few people are familiar with this one. It's a field spell. To activate this card, you must control no monsters, and a set spell or trap you control must have been destroyed by card effect this turn. During the main phase, if exactly one monster with less attack than your life points is summoned, and you have Z1 in your graveyard, destroy that monster, and if you do, take 100, then inflict 800 to your opponent. Okay, well, that's a lot. So, what's the deal with this thing, right? This main phase effect here, this is really what we want to focus on, because it's not once per turn, and it doesn't care what kind of summon is happening. Anytime one monster at a time is being summoned, either you or your opponent, it doesn't matter, it's instantly going to get popped by the Soul-Binding Gate, and then you'll both take a little burn damage. That is a pretty strong, I guess you could call it a floodgate, because it's actually very difficult to establish much of a field under this effect, right? Very few decks are actually summoning multiple monsters at the same time, right? There's no like pendulum strategies that are very popular right now, or any other kind of deck that's going to summon multiple at once. It's almost always one at a time. This hits like normal summons, this hits special summons. Even if it doesn't stop setting, but even if the opponent sets a monster, if they try to flip summon it, it'll get popped by Soul-Binding Gate. So that's pretty interesting. That's kind of funny, right? But the issue with this thing, of course, is the activation condition. You have to control no monsters, and a set spell or trap you control has to have been destroyed by card effect. So that's pretty rough. Obviously, if you don't have any monsters to activate this card, well, now it's going to be really hard for you to establish a field too, which is going to make it extremely difficult to actually kill the opponent. And on top of that, how are we ever going to make sure that a set spell or trap we control is destroyed, right? That's very difficult to do. And what's more, of course, for the effect to actually be applied, we need Z1 in the graveyard, which, here's Z1. It is pretty worthless. Just a normal spell. If this set card is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, you can target a continuous or field spell in the graveyard, add it to your hand. So, obviously, you're kind of intended for this to be the set card that was destroyed in order to meet the activation requirement of Soul-Binding Gate, and like maybe Soul-Binding Gate's in the graveyard somehow, so this thing gets popped, you add it back, but how are we finding this card? It's unsearchable. How are we popping this card? How are we getting Soul-Binding Gate in the graveyard, right? This is just like a huge ask. Well, the key to unlocking the potential of this card is this right here, to activate this card. These are all activation requirements. What if we just didn't activate it? Instead, we are going to place this card face up in our field zone, and that is legally distinct from activating, so you do not have to meet any of these activation requirements in order to place this card in your field zone face up. So how are we going to do that? Well, we've got two main ways. The first one is this relatively new field spell here, Multi-Universe. You have to not control a field spell to activate it, and then it has this ignition effect. You can target a field spell that's banished or in the grave. You pop this card, and then you place the targeted field spell. It also has a nice little protection effect. If a card in the field zone would be destroyed by card effect, you can banish this from your graveyard instead. Pretty nice. That'll protect us from like Feather Duster or whatever other random back row destruction people might be on. And we also have another card here, this fusion monster, Horned Saurus. You have to make it with Kaito Terra plus a dragon or dinosaur. And the only effect we really care about is this one right here. If this card is fusion summoned, you can place a field spell straight from the deck or graveyard face up in the field zone. So that's the key, right? We're going to use one of these two cards to place the Soul-Binding Gate face up. That way we can have monsters on the field, which will actually help us win the duel, and we don't have to worry about that stupid set card being destroyed. We do still, of course, have to have Z1 in the graveyard. So how are we going to do that? Well, with Beatrice. This card somehow is still not banned, even though Fiendsmith has come out at this point. And you might have noticed as well, Horned Saurus is level 6. What's more, he wants to be fused using dinosaurs or dragons. Well, what are level 6 dragons that we might want to play right now? The Bystials, of course. So all of this just kind of comes together to somehow make this card way more playable than you ever would have expected. The basic idea is we're going to make a rank 6 at some point. It's going to be Beatrice, right? Either by using Fiendsmith or using Bystials or the Horned Saurus. And then Beatrice is just going to dump the Z1 from our deck to make the card live. We have the ability as well, of course, because she's a quick effect on the opponent's turn, we can dump a multi-universe if we use the Horned Saurus line, and then we'll have protection for the Soulbinding Gate. Otherwise, Beatrice can dump Soulbinding Gate if we didn't have access to Horned Saurus, if we have multi-universe instead. Beatrice just dumps the Soulbinding Gate from the deck. We activate multi-universe, tag it out. Now multi-universe is already in the graveyard for protection. So that's the game plan. This deck is a little on the weaker side compared to some of the other two I've shown you, but it's also more malleable. Currently, I've optimized this deck just to try and actually activate Soulbinding Gate as much as possible. But you can cut down on some of the cards that facilitate Soulbinding Gate, and instead you could just have this as like a silly option, and you're focusing more on playing like a Bystial Fiendsmith kind of thing, which is actually pretty powerful in its own right. So, for example, you could cut out cards like Fossil Dig, you could cut some copies of the Multi-Universe or the Kaido Terra, right? You could put in hand traps, you could put in, you know, another engine even if it was small enough. There's a lot of room to like mold this deck, but I just went with what I thought would be the funniest. So I got a couple replays to show y'all. Let's take a look and see the deck in action. We've got two of them here. Here's the first one here is when I'm actually using the Soulbinding Gate, and then the other replay is what happens if you can't access the Soulbinding Gate, how you might be able to make some plays regardless. So for some reason my opponent chose to go second, but that's a-okay. We've got a pretty decent hand here. Kaido Terra normally is going to search the polymerization for us. I guess I forgot to describe him in detail, but we drew polymerization already, a little unfortunate. This card's just the deck's only normal summon. You normal him, he adds poly, and then you fuse him with a dragon in hand. So anyway, we're going to do a typical Fiendsmith line here. We've got our called by, so I feel pretty decent. The opponent does not know how Fiendsmith works. Tries to imperm the Requiem. And we've got the called by for the Ash Blossom. Very nice. So that's going to resolve. This will guarantee us a Beatrice, and then with the Kaido Terror in hand, we can easily summon our Horned Saurus to get the field spell. So with Imperm and Ash out of the way, it's extremely likely that this is going to go through. I go for a Magnamut. This is going to be useful because it'll keep a steady flow of Bystials into our hand after we get the Regained up here. Because if the opponent tries to summon, their card is going to be popped in a new chain by the Soulbinding Gate, and we'll actually have a window to use Regained, so we can summon back Magnamut even if he's just going to get destroyed. And we'll still have a chance to get the search off. Also worth noting is that Soulbinding Gate only happens during the main phase, so if your opponent does somehow stick a monster, you can summon a Bystial during their battle phase, or you know, any other phase besides the main phase. And that's another way you can actually get a monster onto the board. It's not at all impossible for the opponent to get stuff. Obviously, they could just set a card, but there are other cards that can be summoned somewhat easily and are immune to card effect destruction. Stuff like maybe you're running into the Fusion Exodia right now, or like Silver Lady Labyrinth, whichever one. The one that can't be destroyed while they have a set card. So, regardless, here into Fiendsmith's sequence. Let me pause for a second here. So I set up the Z1 in Graveyard, and the Soulbinding Gate is online. I had Horn Source and Beatrice. This is probably a win, but I decided, hey, actually, this is such an optimal hand that I have for setup, and the opponent's down to just 2 cards. Let's meme a little bit. Let's see if we can kill him with just the burn damage of Soulbinding Gate. So I link off into Sequence, which is going to get destroyed here. But we get to burn him for 12, we burn him for 8, and we're going to see if we can style on him a little bit. As for what the opponent's on, it turns out he's on like a Rainbow Neos Turbo. I guess that's why he chose to go second. And now the Neos Fusion Graveyard effect is actually going to protect his Rainbow Neos from being destroyed. So this could theoretically be a problem, but I have Druisworm in hand. So here I'm going to get the Magnemite effect, and then we're going to throw out Druisworm. Druisworm, of course, is just going to be popped by Soulbinding Gate as soon as he hits the field, and that'll trigger his effect when he's sent to the graveyard to send a card, so we can send off the Rainbow Neos, keep the field clear, and not give him a chance to activate any of this card's crazy effects. So there we go, we've outed the Rainbow Neos. He's at about half of his life now. Top deck another Druisworm. The Lubellion that we added with our Magnemite will get us another Bystial. I can get out a Kaido Terra here, not that it really does much of anything for us. I set it just in case I'm going to need that. If not, I can just flip it up later to deal 800. And he has another Neos Fusion. He plays multiple Rainbow Dark Dragons, apparently. The absolute madman. But because we have the Druisworm in hand, we can still just do the same play as last time. Did not matter that he just opened with double Neos Fusion. And the Magnemite search will happen yet again. Magnemite's such a ridiculous card in this kind of a grindy situation. Even if he can't stick on the field, just adds so many resources to our hand. That's another 800, and then the Druisworm will be another 800. We're adding more cards off the Regained as well. We get a Sarnier, yet another Bystial name. Why not grab another Lubellion? And at this point, he's pretty much toast. There's no real way that he can come back here. The one thing I did forget during this duel is that Soulbinding Gate only burns as long as the monster has less life points, or sorry, has less attack than your life points. So I'm trying to go for the burn victory here, but I dropped down to 24. And that turns off the burn and the destruction. So, not quite able to completely just burn him out, but we can just summon enough monsters for an easy lethal here. So, styled on this guy just a little bit. But if you were trying to be a little more serious with this incredibly not serious deck, you just leave the Horn Source and the Beatrice on the field and be an easy win. So, here's the other duel I have for you guys. This one, I have no access to Soulbinding Gate, and we see what the deck is still capable of. I do think it's relevant when you're trying to do like a meme deck to have some sort of plan if the meme doesn't come together. So in this case, the plan is just Bystials and Fiendsmith, which are 2 really, really strong engines right now. Some of the best engines in the game. Probably the 2 best engines in the game. So I was testing for any kind of Ash with the Lubellion, and since he doesn't seem to have one, I go ahead and go for the Fiendsmith line here. Without access to the field spell or anything, I think it's probably best to do a Caesar. So that's what I'm going to go for here. This is going to be the 5th summon. After this guy hits the board, now it's the 5th summon, so I go into the Caesar to stop any potential Nibiru play. And now we can freely summon out our Bystials without having to worry about anything like that. Sarnier being back to 3, pretty nice, because now we can do plays like this where when he hits the grave we dump our Regained, and then Lubellion can place Beast onto the field instead of Regained, and then during the end phase Beast gets back the Regained, so that we'll have both of those up. An extra level of disruption now with the Beast. We can pop our Druisworm, to destroy one of his cards, and then that triggers the Druid Worm as well. And then the other Bestial we get is Baldrake, of course, because that lets us banish if he goes into the extra deck, which is also quite relevant. I don't want him to be able to use the Fenrir effect here, so I'm just going to quickly activate Beast. That way he doesn't get to search or banish our cards. We'll trigger Magnemite. He imperms the Caesar, and he has Birth as well, so this guy's hand was kind of crazy. So here, again, we really don't want this Fenrir to resolve. We don't want him banishing our stuff. We don't want him searching cards. And that's it. He can't play through that anymore. You can see when you check his deck, actually, that he's on Tearlament, so the fact that we had a Baldrake in hand as well pretty much means that he didn't have much of a chance. You can see, like, this is a pretty standard-looking Tearlament deck, a very powerful deck still to this day, but he lost the coin toss, and my opening hand was decent, and that was basically all she wrote. He didn't really have a chance. We just Baldrake any tier name he sends to the graveyard, even if he had something like, you know, a Foolish Burial or whatever, and it's over. So there you go. That's the deck. Leave some comments if you guys like the deck profile. If you play the deck and want to let me know how it went for you, I'd be happy to hear about that. But otherwise, I'll catch y'all later.